Hi everybody, thought I'd get the Vox Virage out today. It's such a beautiful guitar. I'm not quite sure why I don't use it that much, but it's nice to be playing it today. And anyway, today I'm going to be talking about the Phrygian Mode, and this is a continuation of my series of videos looking at the modes of the major scale. And when I first started doing these, I wasn't quite sure whether I would get round to looking at all of the modes, particularly the less widely used ones, but I think I will now try and complete this series, and then these videos can kind of sit online as a nice resource for those of you who are interested in doing a deep dive into all of the different modes. And the Phrygian mode, often described as being dark, mysterious and exotic, and it is a great sound. Yes, it is one of the lesser used modes, but I think it is worth exploring, and if you like it, then you can obviously find ways that you can get it into your playing. Now, the format of this video is going to be very similar to the previous modes videos. Going to start by taking a listen to the Phrygian mode and looking at some songs that use this sound. Then I'll show you some ways of playing it on the guitar, and importantly I want to talk about Phrygian mode chords and harmony, which is something that's left out of a lot of other explanations of modes that I've seen. So let's get started. I want to begin by doing a bit of a Phrygian mode improvisation, and then we'll get into all of that other stuff. So there we go. And what is the Phrygian mode? And I suppose the short answer is it's a minor scale with a flat second. So you can take any natural minor scale, find the second note in that scale, move it down by 1 fret, and you've got the Phrygian mode. So there you are. You can stop watching now, move on to the next video if you like. But of course, it's going to be my approach to explore these things a little bit more deeply. And as to the question, is it worth spending a lot of time working on and learning the Phrygian mode? It kind of depends on where you're at as a player. I mean, it's certainly one of the lesser used modes, and if you're more of a beginner or even an intermediate player, there are far more important things to be working on than modes. And you want to make sure that you've got your basics covered first. So major pentatonic, minor pentatonic, major and minor scales, all of that far more important than modes. But if you are at the stage where you want to start, you're looking at some more advanced things, then yes, I think having a basic understanding of all of the modes is important. And then if you particularly like the sound of any of these modes, then you might want to take it even further and really kind of exhaustively learn about these sounds. Now, my starting point with modes is always that they are a sound and a feeling, and you want to learn to recognize that by ear before getting into all of the theoretical stuff. So what I'd like to do is just go through a few song examples that contain the Phrygian mode. And I suppose, like with the Lydian mode, you're a little bit hard pressed to find lots of examples in popular music, but there are some nice ones that I've found. I did a little bit of research, and my first example is the Pink Floyd track Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun. This is an early Pink Floyd track, I think on their second album, Saucer Full of Secrets, and the main riff to that tune I think it goes something like that. I think it's probably played on the bass guitar on the original recording, but those are the notes, and you can hear that it's got that Phrygian flavour. So we've got that E root note, and then you're hearing straight away that flat second note. So you've got an E, and then 1 fret higher you've got an F, and that is an immediate kind of signifier of that Phrygian sound, and the whole riff is based on that kind of sound. It's all played over a kind of E minor chord sound, and then the riff is played again, but with an A root note over an A minor chord. So I suppose you can see that as going to A Phrygian when the chord changes. You find that the Phrygian mode is used a lot in rock and metal. You kind of hear it in Black Sabbath. A good example would be the track The Wizard. And the main opening riff isn't Phrygian, but in the middle of the track you've got this this kind of sound. Should probably turn on some distortion for this. So, great riff, but it's got that Phrygian thing going on. We've got an A power chord just going up 1 fret to the flat second and then back again. So we're establishing that kind of moody and exotic Phrygian sound. And there are plenty of other metal examples. Another good one would be Wherever I May Roam by Metallica, and if I remember rightly, that riff goes something like this. We've got so once again we've got that E drone note, and then that E to F, that flat second Phrygian sound. And in a lot of metal examples it's all based on riffs and power chords, so you just basically need to decide on your home chord, move up 1 fret, and then you set up that sound. Another interesting example is Gin and Juice by Snoop Dogg, and you do, interestingly enough, find this Phrygian sound in quite a lot of kind of hip hop and more urban music, and this is a good example. I think the basic chord, I think it's in F minor. You've got this F minor chord just going down 2 frets to an E flat minor, which, as we shall see later, this is a really good Phrygian mode chord progression. And you're rolling down the street, smoking indoors, sipping on gin and juice. So definitely got that Phrygian flavour in there. One further example, which I did look up online, which surprised me a little bit, is the Clash London Calling. It doesn't obviously sort of scream out Phrygian mode to me, but looking at the verses of that song, and sure enough it has got that kind of Phrygian sound. So the verses, it's basically E minor, F, going to G. I mean, the guitars are doing slightly different things, but the bass is certainly going. It's got that, once again, 1 chord and 1 minor chord, that half step up to the flat second. So yeah, London Calling, at least the verses of that tune are Phrygian. And London Calling, like with many of the other song examples that I've given in previous videos, you don't have to stick to the same modal approach for the entire song. Very often it's just a part of the song that has this mode, and then it will go somewhere else, and I think that's the case with London Calling too. Let's move on to a bit of theory stuff then. And my preferred way of coming at modes is to keep things simple and just to see them as another type of scale. So it's a series of 7 notes with a particular series of whole and half steps, a particular interval formula. And as I already mentioned, the Phrygian mode, one way of seeing it is it's a natural minor scale with a flat second instead of a natural second. So let's just see how that works on the guitar. I'm going to do this from an E root note, so starting here at the 7th fret on the 5th string. Now an E minor scale, an E natural minor scale, would look like this. So we've got E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D and E. So E natural minor, E Aeolian mode, whatever you want to call it. And if you want to turn that into the E Phrygian mode, we're just going to find that second note of the scale, it's an F sharp, and we're going to move down 1 fret so that F sharp becomes an F natural, and then we've got this. Which is the E Phrygian mode. So in terms of the intervals we've got here, this is obviously the root note, this is the flat second, then we've got a flat third. That's what's putting this mode into the minor scale or the minor modes category. So it shares that flat third with the Dorian mode and also with the Aeolian mode as well. Then we've got a fourth, a fifth, this is a flat sixth, flat seven, and then we're back to the root again. So I think it's really important to think in terms of intervals when you're dealing with modes. So as well as learning a scale shape, you want to be aware of the function of those notes in terms of the intervals. And it's that flat second, as I've already said, that is the characteristic, the character note of this particular scale. It's what sets it apart from the other minor flavoured modes, so from the Dorian mode and from the Aeolian mode. This one has got that flat second, so that's really the note that you're going to want to emphasise and bring out if you want that Phrygian flavour. So I think that's a nice straightforward perspective on things, just taking a minor scale, flattening the second degree. But of course with modes you've got an alternative perspective on things, and that is to see this mode in terms of its parent major scale, and that is really what the word mode means. You're taking a scale but you're making a different note the home note. A different note becomes the tonic. Now the Phrygian mode is the third mode of the major scale, so you can take the major scale, any major scale, and if you start that major scale on the third note, and importantly you make that note the tonic, you make that note the home note, and you hear it in that way, then you're going to be playing in the Phrygian mode. So on the fretboard we could start with a C major scale, for example, just C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, the third note of that scale, C, D, E. So we're now going to play the C major scale but starting on this E note. And we've got the same scale that we just arrived at before by coming from the natural minor perspective. We've got an E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E. So it's the E Phrygian mode, just the notes from the C major scale starting from the E. And the most important thing to realise with this approach is that we're no longer really thinking C major at all. The important thing is that E is now home. We're hearing all of the other notes in relation to that new tonic, and that's what gives that Phrygian flavour. You don't want your ear to be leading you back to the C note, otherwise you start hearing that same selection of notes as a C major scale. And that's the two basic approaches you've got to the Phrygian mode, or to any of these modes. Really, you can think of these things as scales in their own right. You can immediately think in terms of E Phrygian mode, or you can calculate which notes you need from the perspective of that parent major scale. Personally, that approach has got its uses, particularly maybe with the lesser used modes. You might like to think in those terms, but ultimately it's a bit clunky, I think, if you want to play in the Phrygian mode, to have to think, well, I need to play the major scale down. Is it a major third or up a minor six, and then you quite quickly get confused. Whereas if you've learned the E Phrygian mode just as its own thing, your fingers can immediately go to the correct notes. Let me give you a few Phrygian scale fingerings then, and let's start at the 12th fret on the low E string. I'm going to do all of this from an E root note. I'm talking about E Phrygian throughout this video, though of course you can move this stuff around and transpose it to other root notes if you want to. And this is a nice convenient 6-string root scale fingering. And that all fits nicely within this 4th fret area. In caged terms, this is the E form of the Phrygian mode. Perhaps you could relate it to an E minor bar chord. That's often a good idea with any scale, really, is to have some kind of chord that you associate with the scale. In this case, it's just a straightforward E minor 6-string root bar chord. So that's option one. We could maybe do a 5th string root scale fingering as well. This starts off exactly the same as we had it before when we did the little 1-octave scale, but we can fill in all of the other notes in this position, and that would look like this. Notice that I'm starting and ending on the root note on this E. So I'm starting from there, going all the way up to the highest available note in this position. Then I'm descending to the lowest available note, which is this B, but then going up, finishing on this E. And for me, that's an important detail because I'm then hearing it as the E Phrygian mode. Everything is revolving around this tonic note. If you don't do that, then the danger is you start hearing it as something else, hearing it probably as the C major scale instead. So important to have that E note, visualize that on the fretboard as the root note, and also hear that as the root note. And that one in caged terms is the A form. If you wanted to associate it with the chord, it would be this 5th string root E minor bar chord. So those are two solid scale fingerings. I think, of course, you've got other options. You could get into 3 note per string stuff. And if you really like this Phrygian sound, you might like to thoroughly go through all 5 of the caged shapes as well. So we've got some scale fingerings. Next step I would suggest would be to noodle around with this scale and get to know it, sort of soak up a bit of the flavour of this sound. And one way that I like to do that is just to record a single droning root note. In this case, it's going to be an E root note, and then I'm going to play around with the notes in the scale. And it's important that you have that drone, some kind of harmonic context to this, because as I just said, otherwise you'll start hearing this series of notes in relation perhaps to another root note. So let me do that now. I've just got an Electro Harmonics freeze pedal. I'm going to create an E drone, and then very simply I'm just going to play around this scale and just listen to the flavour of each of the notes against that droning root. You get the idea. I'm not trying to do anything fancy there. I'm just really listening to each of those notes and how they feel against the root. So you've obviously got that minor flavour, you've got that flat third in there, but it's this minor second which has got that really mysterious kind of tense feeling. So I was trying to emphasise that a little bit and just get my ear used to that sound. And that's how it works over a single droning root note. But what about playing over chords and chord progressions? Let's take a look at how that might work. And really within this scale, within any scale, you can take those notes and generate chords or chord progressions. You can just take any of those 7 notes and construct chords. If you like, you can do that in kind of a formal way, something known as harmonizing the scale. So you can take each degree of the scale and then stack up notes, usually in thirds, to create a series of chords which are going to fit the sound. So let's just do this with one chord to start with. So if we take the root note, the E Phrygian mode, and then we're going to take every other note to construct a chord. So we've got E, next let's take a G, and then a B. So E, G, B, you play those together at the same time. You've got an E minor triad or an E minor chord. So that's the one chord of the Phrygian mode. So you could play the Phrygian mode over just a static single E minor chord. Perhaps you could extend that further and include a D and E minor 7 chord. So again, in theory, you could play the E Phrygian mode over an E minor 7th chord. As I've already mentioned several times, it's that flat second which is the character note of the Phrygian mode though. So maybe we could add that note in to our E minor chord. So we've got an E minor here and we want to add this F note here. Let's just see if I can figure out a way to do this. Maybe something like that. A little bit of a weird sounding chord. We could maybe play it down here. E minor, add in the F on the top string. So I'm not sure if I like that chord or not. Maybe it's quite a cool sound. It's certainly a very tense kind of a sound. But certainly that suggests the Phrygian mode all in a single chord. And then I know that jazz players like to use the Phrygian mode over sus flat 9 chords. So sus meaning you remove the third and replace it with the fourth, and then we can add in that flat 9 as well. So you end up with a chord like this, which is a great sounding chord. We've got the open 6th string, and then we've got 2, 3, 2, open, and open. So really dramatic chord. Phrygian works really well over that chord. In terms of intervals, we've got the root, got the 5th, there's our flat 9, that's the 4th, that's the 5th again, and then we've got another root note on top. So it's a sus flat 9, an E sus flat 9. A chord which you do find reasonably frequently in modern jazz. If we want to get some other chords involved, then there are some very commonly found chord pairs which suggest this Phrygian sound. I've spoken about these already in the song examples. So with the Snoop Dogg example, Gin and Juice, it's essentially just the 1 minor chord going down 2 frets to the flat 7 minor chord. And the reason that is Phrygian is you've got that 1 minor chord establishing our root note, our E tonal centre. Then we've got this D minor chord which contains this F note. That's our character notes. That's our flat 2nd. So by moving between those 2 chords, it kind of gives that Phrygian sound. To further intensify that feeling, I think again this happens on Gin and Juice, is the bass line is actually going up a semitone to the F, so you've in fact got this kind of sound, E minor going to a D minor with an F in the bass. So then the bass line has got that nice semitone movement. So that's a nice 2 chord Phrygian example. You could go the other way. This is another common one, going from the 1 minor chord to the flat 2 major chord. And again, that's Phrygian because we've established our 1, then we've got that character flat 2nd note. And that's really what you're hearing in a lot of these metal examples. Often in metal it's just power chords, but you've got that 1 to the flat 2nd, as we saw in the Black Sabbath example, and it's what happens in London Calling. It's the same chord movement. And you might like to create some more complex Phrygian chord progressions, and the way you would do that is to call upon other chords that belong to the key. So you can go through the scale, harmonise it, and find out which other chords belong. And here I think it is quite helpful to think in terms of the parent major scale. So think in terms of the C major scale, the chords that belong to the scale of C major, same chords belong to E Phrygian, obviously with E as the new root note, as the tonal centre. So if we did that, we'd arrive at this series of 7 chords. We have E minor as the 1, we'd have F as the flat 2, then we'd have G as a flat 3, then we'd have A minor be the 4, and we'd have B diminished as the 5, then we'd have flat 6 C major, and then what we'd have D minor, which would be the flat 7 chord, and then we're back to the 1 chord again. So you've got 7 chords to play around with. You can make those 7th chords as well. Try moving those around, creating a Phrygian chord progression. Actually quite tricky to do this well, because your ear is always going to be pulling you back towards the relative major or minor. So my advice here would be to really make sure you emphasize that 1 chord so you know what the tonal center is. So there's got to be a lot of, in this case, E minor in there, and then emphasize other chords that have that character note, that flat 2nd. So we've already looked at a couple of those chords. We've had the flat 7 minor chord, that's got the F note in there, and also the flat 2nd F major chord. I think the B diminished has got that flat 2nd in there as well, but that's not so widely used in chord progressions. It's a bit too dissonant to be effective. But bear those things in mind, emphasizing the one chord, using those chords with the character note in them, and you should be able to come up with some cool Phrygian chord progressions. Another good tip is to use a droning root note, so have some kind of slash chords where you've got these triads but with a droning bass note, and that again, that really firmly establishes the E tonal center. And once you've got your chord progression, you might like to try doing a little bit of improvising over it, maybe putting a chord progression in a looper and playing over the top of that. So that's what I'm going to do now. I've got the gin and juice chords in my looper, so E minor going down to D minor, or D minor with the F in the bass, and I'm just going to do some very simple noodling over the top of that. And one thing I should mention is how pentatonics fit into all of this. So in one sense, whenever you've got a Phrygian mode, you can just use the minor pentatonic scale. I could play E minor pentatonic and it would work absolutely fine for any of these E Phrygian chord progressions. The only drawback of that is the minor pentatonic scale doesn't have that flat second in it. So in a sense, it's kind of modally neutral. It doesn't describe that modal sound. So by all means play some minor pentatonic stuff, but if you really want that modal flavour, then you want to make sure you include that flat second. And talking of pentatonics, one slightly more advanced trick that you might like to try is playing the minor pentatonic down a whole step from the root note. So in this case, you could try playing D minor pentatonic in this E Phrygian context, and the notes in the D minor pentatonic scale are found in the E Phrygian mode. The reason it's quite an interesting choice is D minor pentatonic contains our F note, so this particular pentatonic is a bit more modally descriptive, so kind of more advanced players might like to give that a try. Okay, enough of that noodling. There we go. It's starting to get really hot in here with all the gear running. I'm starting to lose my mind slightly, but I think I've covered most of the Phrygian mode stuff that I wanted to talk about. If there's anything you think I've left out, then do let me know. If you've got any further Phrygian mode song examples, let me know. I'd be interested in hearing about those as well. That's it for today's video. Do check out the Patreon page if you're interested in a tab for my intro improvisation, along with a lot of the other stuff that I've been talking about in this video, and my splendid backing track. If you're interested in more modes videos, you can find those elsewhere on my channel. I'll try and put together a little playlist of all of those, and I will try and complete this series soon. I think I've got Locrian and Aeolian still to go, so I will try and complete this series. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.